when I was like 5 or 4 or whatever, he didn't want me or my brother to suck our thumbs. And so he built a metal thing that made our arms like C-3PO. Where we could never, you couldn't touch. There was a bar right here.
So he cured you. Did it work?
No, Lee sucks his thumb at night.
I still suck my thumb.
Out of
And I just cursed my grandfather while
out
I
of
was
spite. Okay, are we ready to go? We've got a good one this time. This is gonna rock it so good.
You ready? I don't want to do 2 takes. Hello, everybody, and welcome to 3 Point Perspective, the podcast about illustration, how to do it, how to make a living at it, and how to make an impact in the world with your art. I'm Jake Parker.
I'm Lee White.
And I'm Will Terry. And all three of us are professional illustrators. And we've been working for about the last 25 years. We've worked with just about every major publisher in the business. Together, we've published somewhere between 50 and 100 books, and we've all taught illustration at universities.
Each week, we come up with a new podcast. Wait, sorry, Jake. I got nervous. I started to fumble.
You just get to do your part again.
All right. Each week, we come up with a different topic and discuss it. Hold on. Each week.
How did this happen?
I don't know. I'm out of my game now. I'm out of the zone. Hold on. Let me get it centered. Each week, we come at you guys with a different topic on illustration. Sometimes you're going to... What's happening? Each week, we...
Are you having a stroke?
Is the left half of my face drooping? Each week, we come up with a different topic relating to illustration. Sometimes we're going to argue, sometimes we're going to agree, but each time you are going to learn something brand spanking new.
All right. Well, good to see you guys again. Today, let's just get right down into it because I like today's topic and I think it's going to be really helpful. Will, you're on board for leading us in this discussion. Take it away.
First, we got to talk about your printer.
Jake
No, I want to be in a good mood.
Jake was. I'll give the play-by-play real quick. There has to be an anecdote to start these podcasts off.
I was trying to get into it so that I can get over with it, so that I could get back to my printer and fix it.
Yeah, we can't let that.
Go ahead.
So Jake was lamenting how much he hates his printer, and so we had to play the scene out of Office Space, where they take a baseball bat to a printer, and we enjoyed that together.
Yes, it actually did help me feel a little bit better, but my printer is just it's just, and it's not. I'm grateful for the printer and for all the good prints that it's done for me, and I hate talking like that in front of it, but
today decided you're not.
Yes, today it was like, I'm not going to be connected to. You can't connect to me. Nothing you can do about it. You won't be able to connect to me. You can go ahead, download those drivers, try and install them. Not going to do it. And by the way, I'm not going to connect to the other computer either. And
it's just an island.
The backup computer or the backup printer, the office. So I have my nice printer, then I have my office one for like cheap stuff. So I'm like, fine, I'll send it to the cheap one, and because it's just a sheet that I'm going to draw over the top of. That one's out of ink, just right out of ink. So like they're colluding with each other, and I am about to become a Luddite and just go out into the woods and draw pictures in the dirt.
Okay.
Anyways, let's move forward because the more I talk about this, the higher my blood pressure gets, and it's not good for my health.
Okay, we don't want that. All right. So today's topic is beginner mistakes in making illustrations, and where this topic came from is my wife and I went to one of those places where they give you I think it's called stoneware, where it's pottery that's been fired, but it hasn't been glazed yet.
Oh, right, yeah,
it hasn't been decorated. So then you go in with a paintbrush, and they give you like all they give you really crappy paintbrushes, but I'm going to bring my own next time. But then they give you the paint, the right kind of paint to use, and then you decorate it, and then they glaze it and fire it.
Yeah.
Okay. So the idea for this episode came from that, since I went in there as you know, as an artist kind of, and I'm like, okay, I'm looking at the place, I'm looking at all these people painting, and I'm saying to myself, what are the most common mistakes that people are making in here? And so I asked the girl behind the counter, I'm like, I just basically asked what for this episode, you know, what are the beginning mistakes that people make? She's like, well, if you make a mistake, you can't really erase. Well, good to know. So be very, you know, you can use a pencil. She's like, the pencil will fire off, but not if you use charcoal. And just gave me, you know, a lot of really good tips. There were some little thin line squeeze things, and she's like, those don't really work, but everybody tries to use them, and they can work for certain things. And she showed me examples how they, anyway, you get the picture. So I thought this would be a good episode for us, because sometimes you can learn a lot as a student or as a beginning illustrator, or even as an intermediate illustrator who's trying to get better, by finding out what are the things that most people are doing wrong. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Cool.
So, you know, as a teacher, we've all taught at universities, we've all taught at art schools. We've all seen these common mistakes. And so I think we'll just kind of go through a list, and you guys gave me a few to put on here. There's probably some that we're going to miss, but these are probably the most common ones.
Sounds good.
So,
Perfect.
and if you guys think of any anecdotes to throw in there, feel free, have fun. The first one is not bleeding. Ain't got no bleed.
No bleed.
What is bleed?
Well, I'll answer that for you. Bleed is when your artwork actually extends beyond the size that it will be printed or cropped. And so a lot of times and I used to do this as well, but you'd create art just right to where the trim of the print is going to be, or the final production of it. And the thing is printing's not exact. Trimming is not exact. And so it could cut in or it could cut out of your drawing, and you'll have white space of where your piece is supposed to finish. Is that what you're kind of what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, imagine you're doing a book cover, and you give, you know, the book cover is supposed to be trimmed, or if you measure the dust jacket or the actual book. Well, first, if you measure the dust jacket, that's a piece of paper that's been cut on all sides. And if the image goes to the edge, we call that a bleed. And if you're illustrating right up to where they're supposed to cut, how do you know they're not going to cut just on the other side of your illustration where there's white paper, and now you've got a sliver of white paper shown? So an art director is never going to let that happen. The big mistake that illustrators make is they don't follow the layout they're given, or if they're working for a beginning client, you know, a small publisher or self-publisher, or someone who doesn't really know what they're doing, they might not even give you a layout that includes bleed because they don't know themselves. It's kind of your job as an illustrator to look out for. You can save yourself a lot of trouble and headache if you are aware that you need to provide extra, what we call extra bleed. And there's actually two areas too. There's the live image area. Sometimes they'll give you a layout with three boxes. And the first one is like the live area. The second area is the area between the live area and where the book is supposed to trim. But they want an extra area of trim that goes beyond the trim.
Oh my gosh, you're getting so confused.
You know what I'm saying?
This is the most complicated way. Here, let's do a real example. So if you're doing a book cover, and the book cover itself, the book itself, when it comes out, is going to be 8 inches by 10 inches. That's a standard book size. Then your trim area is the actual 8 by 10. You take a ruler out, it's 8 inches by 10 inches exactly on that. The live area, which Will is talking about, is an area that's basically just inside that trim area that they want you to keep important stuff away from the edge. So that's the live area. So
see how I baited Lee into doing this.
So you don't want your type to be right to the edge, because again, like Will said, cutting is not a precise science and they might cut a little bit off. So you don't want an important element right there at the edge. So the live area is, hey, anything important is away from the edge by a ½ an inch or whatever it's going to be. The trim size is the actual cut. And then the bleed is what goes over. And what I'll add to that, since I'm talking about a cover as this hypothetical situation, whenever you get a cover or any kind of work, you want to add more bleed. Like a lot of times publishing, they'll say, hey, 1/8 of an inch all the way around, which equals 1/4. That is such a small area. I go ahead and add like a full inch to whatever. So if it's an 8x10 cover, my actual size will be 10 by 12.
Now, this is such a great topic because this one can keep going. If you give too much bleed, how do you ensure that they don't use all that bleed? In other words, if they ask for 1/8 of an inch and that's all the way around, so then you're right, that's an extra 1/4 inch to both the top and bottom of your illustration.
Yeah.
But you give them a full ½ inch all the way around.
Then they start shrinking it. Yeah.
Now you've diluted your illustration because the main part that you designed is in the middle and there's all this superfluous stuff on the outside. So how do you ensure they don't use that?
When I deliver the file to the client, I still give them the measurements that they asked for, or maybe just a little bit more. But I still have the file. I'll give you an example of what happens if you don't do that. The last children's book that I did, for the dust jacket, I didn't plan as much. I mean, I added the normal bleed amount that I normally do, but the dust jacket, I swear, it was like I had to add an extra 3 inches, and I had to go back into a finished illustration that was on all these different layers and try to add, 1.5 inches to the top, 1.5 inches to the bottom at the end after the thing was completely done. And I just didn't like doing that at all. So I just create the huge bleed for myself, and I tell them that I've got a file with more bleed too. But I give them what they're asking for exactly, just so they don't, a designer doesn't plop it in like you're saying, Will, and all of a sudden now everything's small.
Are you saying you crop out of the large size and give them, okay, but you withhold more in case they're like, we need more. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so then when they contact you, they say, hey, we need more. And you're like, oh, good. I have it right here.
Yeah, I've done that too. And it's so much easier to illustrate. Imagine if you're working digitally and you've got your document size and you're painting to the edge of that document. And that creates a line. That creates a hard line where everything is ending. Tree branches, buildings, people, anything that crops out of that image area is creating a line, a visual line. If you try to add extra, if you go back into your canvas size, and we're talking about digitally, and you increase your canvas size and now you fill with white around the edge, how in the world do you add bleed without going meticulously around your illustration and continuing those lines? It's tough. It can be many, many, many hours trying to match, and you'll never get it completely right. Unless you spend maybe a day or two sometimes.
Oh no, I have another anecdote I want to add. This is so good. I may be able to show you guys on the if you're watching YouTube. Oh, where is
Jake, what is our YouTube channel?
I think it's Society of Visual Storytelling.
Yeah, there you go. So you can watch the three of us bungle around on here.
I've got it over here. So when Will starts telling a long, meaningless story, I'll go grab it so you can see this. But so on before they contacted me to add the extra bleed, the printer decided to go ahead and try to add the extra bleed. And so what they did is they copied and pasted the actual illustration to fill up the bleed. That they
did they mirror it on the edges?
Yeah, and like so I had an octopus on the edge, and then they flipped it so the octopus had like 16 legs.
Oh man!
And my client then the printer sends that proof to my client. My client calls and says, "Why did you give us a crazy looking octopus with 16 legs?" I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And I pulled it up and I gave him a screenshot. I was like, "My octopus has 8 legs. I don't know what you're talking about."
That's funny.
So that's what I had to go fix, but I've got that version here. I'll grab it in just a second.
Wow. When I was painting in acrylic paint, the first part of my career, I did that for like 17, 18 years. And I would get pieces where I didn't give them enough bleed from time to time. And they would come back and ask, talk about difficult. That really is almost impossible because you've got the way that I would work is I would tape my paper, the edge of my paper, and I would gesso over that, and then peel the tape at the end. So now you've got a raised, imagine on your paper, you've got a raised line of painted area.
Oh man.
And that line, you can't match up with it, So
Right.
I would end up really making, I did the best I could, but there was always kind of a line. And then sometimes they would ask, can we feather it in Photoshop just a little bit? And I would give them permission, and it was just a mess. So the easiest thing is make sure you know where the trim size is so that you can add plenty of extra bleed. You don't have to send it all to your client, but give them. And I have a book. I'm not going to mention the name of it because I don't want the publisher to be, I don't want them to be upset. But their designer used all of my bleed, it's like, what's funny is in her layouts, I sent her the sketch. She put the sketch in. It looked great. Gave her tons of extra bleed and used it all on the cover. So it just ruined the whole design of the cover. I mean, if you haven't, it's hard to describe in words, but the reason it ruins it is because you designed an area that mattered. And then if you just add an inch all the way around of extra nonsense, of nothingness, it just dilutes the potency
It's
of your
the
design.
equivalent of like pan and scan on the old, when they would take a widescreen movie and like have to trim it down for a square TV.
Yep. Yep, exactly.
Kind of like that. It's not the director's original vision.
Yeah. Okay, for those who are following along at home, the second one is not drawing through. And
wait, there was one more thing I wanted to add to that.
Do you want to go back to bleeding again?
Sorry, I know it's a topic we're beaten to death, but there was just one issue.
Go for it.
I just lost it though because I was filling out an online form while you're talking.
Wow. Wow.
Hold on, it's really important. It's really important.
It's super importantly. It's almost as important as the meaningless story I'm about to tell.
Oh man. Why don't you just move on to the next one?
And move on. I'll just interject.
We'll revisit it when your brain starts working.
Go ahead.
Okay. Not drawing through is a term or a phrase we use for the idea of establishing, like a lot of people will do it when they are drawing in their sketchbook. Okay.
Sorry. Sorry, I don't want to forget it. But I don't know if you're going to talk about this later, so let me know if you are. Since we're talking about preparing a file for sending to the printer, a lot of people end up, because you don't know everything that's going to be used for an image, a lot of people work at twice the size that they're asked to work. So for an 8x10 cover, they'll work at 16 by 20. And that way you can use it as a poster. You can use it as big prints later.
I already know what you're going to say. So when they ask for that 1/8 of an inch all the way around, you now have to double that and give them a 1/4 inch all the way around. That's what you were going to say.
No, I'm talking about the rest of the size that you make the... Oh, yeah. Obviously, you got to double the size they ask it for. But
right.
I set up my bleed at the actual size, and then I changed the canvas, by the way. So I don't have to calculate that.
Oh, gotcha.
If that makes sense. But anyway, working bigger than your actual trim size, than the actual thing's going to be printed, is always a good practice. And I definitely recommend that to all my students. What do you guys think? Do you do that?
That's a good one. That could have been another item on the list.
Goes with the bleed.
Yeah. Always work bigger. I don't do double, but
let's make that number 2.
Yeah, I'll at least do 20% bigger, at the minimum.
I typically do 50. I don't double it. A lot of people, when they're working traditionally, double it, but you don't have to.
What's the reason for that? Working larger?
So you can print later if they ask for a poster, like to sell it, or if they need to change the size or something. You're always struggling if you make something small because you can't go up in resolution to a certain point.
But another big reason is if you're working traditionally, if you're working on an 8x10 cover in oil paint, you better be a really good painter to work at 8x10. And some people can do that. But boy, if you work double or even triple the size, you can usually, when they reduce it down, it'll be tighter. Your drawing's usually better.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah.
Okay, so sorry for interrupting, but at least we got some mileage out of that.
Okay, not drawing through is going to be number 3.
Okay.
And describe that. That's the idea that you might be working in a sketchbook where the edge of the paper, or on just a single sheet, is where the artist is drawing, and when they get to the edge, there's no more paper, so they just try to fake it. If there's an ellipse or something, or a sphere that crops out and comes back in, they'll try to figure out where that comes back in. The better way to do it is to work smaller than your paper size, define an area on your paper, aka like doing a thumbnail or comp size. Then you can draw that full circle or that ellipse or whatever the shape is that goes outside of your image area and comes back in. But because you're drawing from your shoulder, you can make a nice ellipse and you can get it really accurate where it would exit the image and re-enter in the right spot. Not drawing through creates problems that the artist often doesn't see, but that the viewer will detect, like a really wacky, wonky.
Not only that, like I think the ellipses is one thing, but like say you're doing an environment or you're doing like a tree or a car or something like that, it's contained. You're letting the the size of your paper or your sketchbook or something like that determine what the proportions, what the size of that thing is going to be. And so I always tell my students and people I've worked with is that you shrink, like you're saying, you draw a box on your paper that you're going to draw in. And then that way, if it does need to, if this tree does need to go outside of that shape, you can easily do that. But oftentimes I'll see like maybe a tree will be wedged into the corner because that was, they're trying to fill out the entire shape there instead of letting the tree like naturally, not naturally, but artistically, like look how it should look.
Yeah. Yeah. You need to look at your image area as a window into a world. And you really can't do that if you're drawing in the window and staying contained in that window. You need to be able to draw parts of the world that extend beyond, that are going to be cropped out later on.
Well, that's why I like drawing a big scene and then using a smaller window and kind of moving around, almost like you have a camera. You get way more interesting layouts. But I'll tell you, some people will be like, "Oh, I don't draw realistically, or I don't draw in an animation style, so I don't need that." I will tell you, coming from the design side of things, sensibilities, you still need it. I mean, I just did a book project where, even doing my goofy bad drawings, some of the people were wearing like a poncho. And in order to place the far arm or the far leg, if they're turned in a 3/4, I had to draw through. Otherwise, it just looked really funny. The arm would be, if somebody measured, would be twice as long if I didn't do that, or too short.
Yep. Okay, number 4 is over illustrating. And to me, over illustrating is putting superfluous things in your illustration that are going to tell a different story, or that are going to be distracting from the idea that you're trying to convey. So you're when you're illustrating, you're trying to show a main idea. You're trying to, as an illustrator, you're trying to convey, an idea. And if maybe a good example of this would be, I don't know, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and you go nuts with like the different various toys that are in the little, in the little cabin or whatever the environment is.
Right.
And maybe some of those toys have a lot of personality, that are really distracting and almost look like another character. That might be one way of over illustrating. Another one might be to put so much ornateness in the architecture itself that it becomes distracting. It becomes almost more important. I've seen people illustrate. You can do this with portraiture too, where you're illustrating them. The job is to illustrate someone's portrait, to capture their likeness, to capture their personality. And I've seen artists who have really fallen in love with drawing their hands and drawn like every vein and every bone and all of a sudden it just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so there's a sensibility to trying to figure out what you're going to show and more importantly, what you're going to leave out. So that's what we're talking about. Over illustrating is putting too much in.
I got a good one for that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I see this one a lot, especially we're doing a contest this month. That was my prompt at SVSLearn.com, and the prompt was nightfall. One of the big things I see there is people put in multiple light sources, especially when it's a nighttime scene. It'll be like a street light, an interior light hitting the character, and then the moonlight, and they're all equally bright. So sort of the same idea is like, I don't know where to look because there's these really hot spots all over your image. Would that be overdrawn? You guys look like, no, that's not part of what I'm talking about.
Well, Jake's trying to take over the world with a drawing right now.
Jake's not even interested. He's not even part of this.
I'm listening. I'm playing the part of listener today. No.
Okay, well, this next one kind of goes along with that. I don't know if it deserves its own, but we're going to give it its own. Number 5 is, well, I guess this is different because this deals with atmospheric perspective, where you'll see too much detail in the background and blurriness in the foreground. So the idea here is that when we view the world, our eyes see things in focus that are closer to us. And as they move farther and farther into distance, they become more and more blurry. Edges become softer, just because our eyes cannot focus on things that are, and I'm talking about, things that are 2 feet away versus 20 feet away versus 200 feet away, 2,000 feet away, 2 miles away, 20 miles away. As we go into the distance, things are just going to get more and more blurry. And what I've often noticed with beginning illustrators' work is you'll see the reverse of that. And so, in other words, if you follow that, if you make things in the foreground crisp, the edges crisp, the details crisper, and as they move back blurry, you will recreate a situation that we're familiar with in viewing real life. If you do the opposite of that, you'll create something that looks, well, to me, it looks disturbing because I'm like,
yeah,
everything is the same level of like high fidelity.
Yeah, that would be the other thing. So either making things in the foreground blurry and things in the background crisp, or everything has the same crispness.
That also causes you to draw way longer than you really actually have to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think too, like that. Then you're starting to make like puzzle art. You ever look at like the illustrations for puzzles,
mm-hmm.
and they're like, there's so much detail in them because every puzzle piece needs to have some sort of detail on it.
Right.
Marks,
yeah. And so, maybe if you like doing that, maybe you've got a bright future as a puzzle artist. So I don't want to knock it.
Now in comics, Jake, when you're doing something that is a little more linear, a little more graphic, how do you simplify a background? Like for me and Will, we're a little more atmospheric, so we'll just blur it. But how do you do
comics, I'll do an establishing shot. So in comics, you're telling a story through a series of images, one right after another, like sequential art, right? So what you'll do is an establishing shot, and you'll show the characters in their environment, sitting at a table. There's walls, there's characters behind them, just a really detailed first image. And then I'll usually light it or color it or do something just to give the main characters emphasis. But then every panel after that, you don't have to put in that much detail. You could just put in a few marks that suggest what was in that first panel.
Mm-hmm.
You could do even like if you look at like Missile Mouse and Skyheart, I'll just have abstract shapes behind them that sort of symbolize the environment that they're in. But you don't even think about it because you got a word bubble there, you got the character, and your eyes are moving along the page so fast you don't even like stop to look at the backgrounds. And that's one of my main frustrations with some comics that are just too beautiful. They're too like rich. Is where they illustrate every single panel, like just so dense with imagery that You can't even read the story because you're stopping to like try and take in all the detail there.
That's why I've avoided most comics, by the way, is I love the cover. I get drawn in by this pretty image, and then I open it and it's just so packed. I'm like, I can't even look at it. It's too much.
Yeah.
It hits me like a,
You know who you'd
wall.
like, actually? You would like Hellboy by Mike Mignola. That would be right up your alley if you want like a real.
I told you he bought an original from me, didn't I?
No, really?
Yeah.
No kidding.
So maybe Mike Mignola would like Lee White.
Yeah, he bought an original in LA at a gallery I was showing at, and he sent me a message on Facebook, and I was like, "What?"
No kidding.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, you should. You owe it to him.
Yeah, you owe it
read
to
one
him.
of his comics.
He does it great. I mean, I do love the way he simplifies things.
Wow, that just
I like how you said Mike Mignola, like I wouldn't know who that is.
I don't know. You said you don't like comics.
Yeah, but he transcends that medium, I think, with the
Yeah. I guess if there was a comic artist that you would know about, it'd be Mike Mignola.
He's coming over to our house for dinner this weekend.
Guys, stop
right?
it. Stop it.
I'm telling the truth. Will's lying. Will's trying to step up.
Number 6, as actually was suggested by our own Lee White, too much perspective. What did you mean by that, Lee?
Once people, I guess the same thing could be added with anatomy, but I'll talk about that in a second. But it's where you've learned the rules of perspective, and now all of your illustrations basically become a perspective assignment. And what you're really trying to say with perspective is, here's a space that moves, there's an environment that moves back in space. There's a million ways to solve that problem that does not use linear perspective. I guess I should add that to it, that's what we're talking about, is when you have a vanishing point and all the vanishing things point back there. And you see that with definitely with people who are in that beginning perspective class, because everything looks like the train tracks going back. It'll be a road, a path, whatever. And everything's just zooming back, and everything pulls back to that vanishing point. And if you're really trying to convey space, I try to tell people, like, solve the problem with the other options, which are design. Anytime you have an overlap, you've now indicated a spatial relationship. That's all perspective does. Anytime you have a change in scale, you've introduced a size kind of metric in there. If you have two lampposts and one's bigger than the other, well, automatically, almost no matter where they are on the page, we'll read that as being closer, the bigger one being closer. So there's all these design tricks, and some of them may be better for your image than tracking back a vanishing point.
One thing that I've noticed is with beginning students, and I have this in my creative composition class, interesting enough, also at SVSLearn.com, where you can learn how to illustrate like the pros.
You don't even know the slogan.
I don't know it. I have no idea what it is.
So good.
It's like, hey, where you too can be awesome at doing drawing. No, I've noticed that, and I've given this assignment a bunch of times, and I put examples in that class from this, was as I would have my students draw from their head, because sometimes I'd want them to draw with reference, and sometimes this was basically a test, but I wouldn't tell them it's a test. So I'd say, I want you to draw a garage with the garage door up, just a garage of a house. And I want you to fill it with items that you would find in a garage. And interestingly, what I normally get on the first pass, because then I show them examples from the previous class when they got a second run at it after I showed them what would make it more dynamic. And what the default is, what the normal illustrator usually does, is they draw, let's say they draw like a trash can, they'll draw a barbecue grill, they might draw a set of weights, they might draw some boxes, maybe an exercise bike, different things like that. And they'll give space to each one. They won't overlap them. And they also will put the camera, they'll pull the camera back so that everything gets equal billing, equal size. So what you end up having is a bunch of objects that are all about the same size, roughly. And they're all small. And then I go through I will show them my small, medium, huge lecture, which is, instead of going with objects that are small, and then including medium and big for variety. I want to over exaggerate their minds or stretch their minds so that they can exaggerate and go with small to tiny objects, medium sized objects, and huge objects that have to crop outside of the image area. And they have to overlap each other. And I think one of the hardest things for illustrators to do is to draw something, because it requires drawing that barbecue grill and then putting something over top of that drawing, which is throwing away perceived value, right? You spent time drawing the barbecue grill, and it's so hard for beginning illustrators to then eclipse it with something and only have a piece of that barbecue grill sticking out. But yet that's what creates a much more dynamic image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add anatomy to that too, just as an add-on?
Add away.
So the same, I can always tell when people are taking the anatomy class when they're in their foundation, because all the people look like He-Man. And, whether they need muscles, everybody's got muscles everywhere. Like I can see everybody's traps in their, sternocleidomastoid connecting into all these little, they got everything showing. And what I try to tell students coming out of that class is muscles have a function. And so if all you listeners right here, as long as you're not driving, make a big bicep muscle, it makes a muscle on top. But if you notice the bottom side of your arm, it stretches it, it relaxes that side, it straightens it out. In other words, you can't have flexed muscles on both sides of your arm.
Right.
You can't. And so you got to think about function. You can't just know the anatomy and just put it all over the place. You have to say, okay, what's going to be flexed? What's going to be relaxed in a pose? And then also the anatomy needs to support the pose, the gesture and all that stuff, not just be tacked on because you've learned some new muscles.
Right. Perfect.
That's a good one. I think too, also with like any sort of machinery or tech, you're gonna you can go really overboard there. And I think that the rule I always say is the 80-20 rule. Maybe it's a 70-30 rule. I always go back and forth because both work, but 70% of your image should be visually one thing. It should be open space, with 30% of it being busy space, lots of line work, lots of interest, lots of contrast. And then the 70% should be like a place where your eye could rest, a place where, it's just dead air. And that's where you get a really dynamic. And that goes to character design. It goes to, if you're designing a spaceship or a vehicle or a house or something like that, have the house favor one or the other, where you have all this detail in the shingles and in the roof, but then the walls of the house are just blank and easy to rest, for your eye to rest on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are good general rules to follow. There's definitely times to break those, but in general, I totally agree. Okay, the next one is yours, Jake. You threw in there odd POV. What does that mean?
Oh yeah, that kind of goes with the perspective thing, and that is picking either a totally benign, mundane point of view to show your image, or because you don't know where to put like the viewer's eye, you don't know how to draw the plane, you don't have like a cinematographer's like mindset about the illustration that you're making. Oftentimes what I'll see is they'll elevate the view, the POV, to maybe 18 feet in the air or something weird, like 20 feet in the air. So you're looking at like a hallway in a castle, or you're looking at the downtown of a small town, and the kid's running down the street with his dog, but we're 18 feet in the air.
Yeah.
We're kind of looking down at the tops of everybody's heads, right?
And there's just
You've
no
seen
reason
that before,
for it.
right?
Yeah.
And so I say just imagine that you're there observing this, you yourself. And if you're 5'8" or whatever, then draw everything as if you're 5'8" and other people are going to be eye level with you, or maybe get really interesting and draw it from 3 feet. If you want to exaggerate the height of your main character, draw that low. If you want to emphasize how small a character is, then maybe you go up high up into the air. But
Yeah.
don't just arbitrarily like, oh, this is all I know how to do. Do it. Like, spend a little time figuring that out.
What would you say to the person whose response would be, I'm trying to add variety. I don't want the same camera angle, so that's why I chose to mix it up. So I'm just mixing it up.
Mix it up, that's fine, but make sure you're having like a reason for it. I just I could tell mixing it up from lazy or amateurness. Like like if every single one of your illustrations are all from that same POV, you're not mixing it up, and you don't understand the role that the point of view plays in your illustration. But yeah, if that's happening every once in a while for a reason, that's good. Do it.
Yeah. I mean, the camera in the air 100 feet above the town is a good idea for like an establishing shot, right? Where you're saying this is where this story is taking place.
Exactly.
In this little hamlet here or something like that. And then when Dad gets home, because the kids have painted Desitin all over the walls, and they're going to be in trouble, and Dad comes home and now the camera's down low.
This happened in real life, didn't it, Will?
It did. I'm triggered by this. Yeah. Yeah, this has happened.
No one just pulls Desitin out of the air.
It's hard to get rid of, man. And then, and it gets in things, and the smell. You never.
I had a roommate that played a prank on me once, and he put Desitin in my tube of toothpaste.
Oh wow!
So I just squirted it right on a toothbrush.
Oh wow, that's a good prank.
Wow!
Might have
brushed
to
it right in.
One.
Yeah, it was not fun.
Okay, the next one. I think this was yours, Lee. You said always using the airbrush or overusing the airbrush.
I think Jake said that first part, and then I added to it. Jake, you want to take that?
Jake said, just out of the blue, he said overusing, and you went the airbrush.
Maybe we did. It's a constant.
It's because last time Lee and I were looking at the Critique Arena images that we were getting in and trying to pick which ones were our favorites and which ones would go into the final 16. And pretty much every one that didn't make the cut, well, the first pass that were easily just like, not this one, not this one. Because we do it in waves. We just do a yes or no, and then we go to all the yeses and figure that out. But the easy no's, they all were using the airbrush tool, set at either full opacity and just no control over edges or it's such a seductive tool, because here you are, you can make a stroke and it just easily it just has that beautiful like edge to it, like zero edge to it, just blends right into the back. But it needs to be used wisely, and it needs to be used deliberately, and to use it for everything, even if it's a smaller size or larger size, it can really make a piece.
Sometimes it's like lighting a candle with a flamethrower, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, you can do it, but
yeah, exactly.
You want some candle left over.
The other side of that is turning on too much opacity. So sometimes people will then try to overcorrect, and they'll say, okay, I'm going to only paint with a hard brush, but they turn on that opacity at full control, or at full opacity. So you can make a 10% mark or a 100% mark, depending on how hard you're pressing down. That'll equal out to look like an airbrushed image, because there's basically no hard edges, unless you're painting with the thing pressed all the way down. So watch out for that one too.
Yeah. Okay, that was number 8. Anything left on that, you guys? We move on.
No, I think that just
take note of that one though, because that one, like Jake said, we see that one. I mean, these other ones are kind of interspersed within entries, but that one is a constant.
Yeah. Another thing that I would add to that is that I see people. No, I lost my train of thought. It was there. Now it's gone. See, this is contagious, Lee.
Don't blame me. I found mine in 1 second.
It's there. You need to say something stupid so I can remember it.
Oh, just wait. That won't be long.
If I remember it, I'll come back to it. Okay, the next one is number 9, is inconsistent drawing or rendering. And I put this one on the list because what came to mind is I'll see someone's drawing, and you'll see a poorly drawn figure and a really well drawn falcon on their shoulder or something like that. That'd be my example, right? And immediately I go, okay, so they had a really good reference of the falcon, but zero or bad reference on the human character. And so, yeah, and I'll see this a lot where, or it'll either happen that way, or stylistically something doesn't match. So you'll have something that's more academically drawn next to something more Dr. Seussian, and you're like, okay, these worlds don't match. So having really good drawing consistency, and then I threw rendering in there as well, because I see this more digitally than traditionally. Traditionally, people's paintings tend to be, beginning paintings tend to be more consistent. I don't want to say this in a rude way, but consistently bad. Like if they're going to be bad, they're consistently bad. Digitally, because you can use digital tricks, I'll see people that have probably thrown a piece of reference underneath their on a lower layer and traced it. So they're getting, or even rendered over it. So now they're copying the rendering from a photo, or
so it's like they created like a downtown street, and they pulled that from their perspective class, but then cars are too hard to draw in perspective, so they found a photo reference of the car that's kind of in the same perspective, and they'll trace over that, and it's just not quite meshing, that kind of thing.
This might be a good time to talk about when it's okay to trace stuff, because I mean, you guys trace stuff sometimes, right? No,
trace stuff.
I'm a big fan of that as training. I don't actually trace that much stuff in my everyday life, but one of my first exercises in my sophomore level class is I have everybody trace a head. A lot of times I use that classic Winston Churchill photo, and I give them tracing paper, and I said, all right, if we took away the drawing problems, everybody should be able to nail this. Everybody will do a perfect drawing, right? Because they're tracing. And I put them all up, and it's amazing how different all 20 are.
Oh, wow.
And so we talk about it. You're making artistic choices even when you're tracing.
Yeah, even when you're tracing.
So I love it as a training tool.
I will trace motifs sometimes just to get the feel of it. And then I'll continue on and put it in there, different things like that, different architectures and things like that. But I think if you're tracing because you can't draw something in the perspective that it needs to be, just know that as you're doing that, you're delaying the inevitable. That if you're going to be successful as an illustrator, you're going to have to learn how to draw it in perspective. And it's actually pretty easy.
The only time I trace, it's when I need to like really save time, and it's probably from a photo that I've taken. And if not, it's from a photo that I've altered. Photoshop, I'll either stretch it or mess with the proportions a little bit, just so that it's like it becomes more mine. And then I trace over it in a way that it doesn't look like it's traced. So I'm adding my marks to it, my style to it.
Yeah, you're sort of modifying the framework, the underlying framework, and then you draw it on top.
Yeah, basically, I'm using it as sort of structure for the drawing.
Right. The only time I would also advocate for tracing is if likeness is an absolute must. One of the commercial schools that I studied at when I was going to school at Art Center, but I would always take a third term off, and I'd go over to this other school called Associates in Art, and they were a real commercial driven school. A lot of the teachers worked in entertainment, like doing movie posters and stuff. And if you have to draw like Steve Buscemi, they would require exact photo reference of the angle. And they trace it because it has to be perfect.
What about?
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like Drew Struzan, if that's what he's doing, or
he's absolutely doing, because I worked with what was his name, Mark Westermo and Mike Butkus, and both of those guys worked under Drew Struzan and did comps for him and stuff, and they were all tracing.
Well, you mumbled a little bit. What was the first name? Mark
Westermo.
Westermo. Got to get
he was
that
one
in
of the
there
main
for the
guys.
show notes.
Yeah, he was one of the main guys doing a lot of movie posters back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Were they taking the photos themselves, or were they working off of like studio photos?
The studio would provide them.
I see. That's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Almost done here. We've got a couple more. poorly designed, a poorly designed drawing. Some of these are kind of obvious, I think, but the reason I included this one is because I think that a lot of beginning artists don't really understand the difference between drawing and design. And designing is a totally different skill than drawing. You can draw. There was one thing I was going to mention earlier too that I want to get in here when we were talking about on number 9. So I'm going to back up just a second because I just remembered it.
Is this the one you forgot?
No,
oh.
That's lost forever.
Okay.
But no, inconsistent drawing. When I said that, if you can't draw something in the perspective that you need to, you're delaying the inevitable, and you need to learn how to do that. I designed a class because I was really bad at that. I designed a class called Visualizing Drawing in Perspective that we have at SVS for that reason, because it was a weakness of mine that I turned into a strength, and I wanted to share that with other people on my mindset on really quickly putting something in the proper perspective and how to visualize that and how to capture what you're visualizing in your mind. Because in your mind, what's wrong. You can see that if you traced the example you gave, Jake, was drawing an automobile. Right. That's not quite in the right perspective. And when you draw it, when you trace it in there, you're trying to tell yourself it's good enough. It'll work. It's not that bad. But you know that the angle is wrong. It's either too high or too low. So it's either going, if it continued in the path it's going, it would go subterranean, or it would start flying up in the air,
Right.
And there's an easy way. I'm just telling you, it's not that hard to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but going back to number 10, poorly designed, the difference between design and drawing is vast. Designing is arranging and organizing, and bringing order, and drawing is trying to recreate spatially and describing an object that you're seeing. And so they're just completely two different things. And I would say most students think that drawing is synonymous with design in the beginning, and I really have to spend a lot of time separating that out and sharing that. There's no way, and the reason I included this, there's no way if you have a poorly designed drawing that you can end up with a good painting at the end. It doesn't matter if your drawing skills are great, and it doesn't matter if your painting skills are great. If you're missing that third component of design, you're never going to have, you're going to have your idols in the art world, in the illustration world that you look up to, and you're going to wonder why you're never matching up. And I've seen people struggle for over a decade, and they went through a program that never explained the difference between design, or they were never able to slow down and listen. And it's usually the students who draw really well who are the most resistant to learning how to design, I found.
Yeah. I agree exactly what you're saying, but I don't, drawing is like the overarching term. It's like I guess the tool that you're using, but I divide in between design and rendering.
Yeah.
And those two are, so like rendering is when you see someone who's just done amazing like photo reproduction. Like they look at a photograph and they've got like the beads of sweat coming down and everything looks like it's really cool, and it's like maybe even twice as big or something. That is a good rendering. But there's no design to that. The photo just did the work basically,
right.
And they're just interpreting that in the rendering. And then on the flip side, you're right, the design is figuring out taking photo reference, taking the concept that you have, the ideas that you have, putting them together, creating something new, whole cloth. And then once that's created, then the rendering is what happens on the top. That's where you actually make something finished that you could show somebody. It's just semantics.
Yeah. You look bored, Lee.
No, I'm just trying to figure out how I want to say what I want to say.
No, he's like, if Jake's going to check out, I'm going to check
No,
out.
I'm just daydreaming over here. No, I always say that good design trumps good drawing, and I agree 100% that my more problematic students have been the people who can actually draw well.
Yeah,
because they resist that.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I would go in my classes at UVU. I would say often I would begin a class with saying, "Who's the best drawer in here?" And of course, they're never going to point to themselves. And then I'd say, "Point to the best drawer in here," and all the hands kind of converge over in one area. And then I would say, I'm not accusing you of anything, because then they get all bashful. The light spotlight's on them. But I say, just as a point of warning, usually the best drawers usually have the hardest time with this class, because I'm going to ask you to put away what you're really good at and focus on what you're not good at. And that's hard to do, because you've always razzled and dazzled everybody in the class. Everybody knows you're the best, and I'm going to ask you to not be known for that during this class, and to really focus on learning how to design. And some do, and some never seem to ever.
Well, the hard part too is sometimes they'll turn in work that is actually beautifully drawn, like Jake was saying, like the beads of sweat look great and the individual eyeball looks great, all the individual little pieces of the drawing look great. It's just a poor composition. So when you start critiquing it, they don't understand that you're not dazzled by
don't
drawing.
You see my great drawing? Look at this hand that I drew. So it's amazing.
They resist it, and can't resist. Come to the dark side.
Yeah. Last but not least, invalid architecture and prop design. And by that, I mean making up part of a world so that you're basically getting inconsistencies. Maybe this is kind of should have gone with where's the inconsistent drawing or rendering. Maybe it could be combined in there. But specifically what I'm talking about is, I've seen people, they're drawing characters in their stylized way. They're drawing different things, but they're trying to convey a certain time and place. So let's say Central Park, current day, or even Central Park, 50 years ago. And there's an architecture to the benches in Central Park in New York City. You can't redesign those benches. They do look a certain way. You can design the people and the dog and the birds in your own way, but the benches kind of have to have a simple, even if it's simplified, version of that Central Park bench.
Otherwise,
it's not Central Park.
Ceases to be Central Park. It becomes something else.
So I've seen people out of their
like
head,
alternate reality.
Yeah, and I used to do this. You think, well, how hard could a bench be? I know that it's about this high. I know that it's about this wide. And so they get like the box that it would fit in, right? But then from there, out of the box, the bench looks like it was built in 8th grade industrial arts class. I don't think they even have those anymore, though, do they? Do we have industrial arts anymore?
Is that like shop?
Yeah, shop class. It's like
class.
We got some 2x4s here, and we cut those. And then we'll just figure out, like, obviously 2x4s could come up and make the arms, and it's just really blocky and clunky, and it doesn't look like anything like a public bench.
Right.
And so that's probably the best example I could give is if you're trying to, you can take a mailbox that's found anywhere in Americana, the mailbox with the little flag that's out on the street.
Right.
And you take 100 illustrators and say, design a really fun mailbox. They're going to take that original design and they're going to riff on it. But the best ones are all going to remind you of that mailbox. It's not time to start over and just say, design any box that you could put out in front of your house. It's going to need to be rounded on the top.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yet you could type in mailbox into Google Images and get all kinds of different shapes inside. But if you want to draw, I guess the caveat there is, if you don't want your mailbox to be a distraction in your illustration, do the typical one that you would see.
Yeah.
If the story's about the mailbox.
So basically what you're saying is do 5 extra minutes of homework and go to Google Images and just pull up what does a Central
Right.
Park bench look like. Don't trace it, but draw your version of it that still looks like it.
Yep.
I'll tell you, I had a really cool assignment when I was in school, an industrial design assignment. That was my minor. And the assignment was we had to design a parking meter, but you were randomly given a different location in Los Angeles about where that parking meter would go. So somebody got a parking meter in front of the Museum of Modern Art. Somebody got one in Hollywood. Somebody got one in Venice Beach. So what would these different things look like depending on those locations?
Interesting.
It was great. It's really fun.
Well, and that, I mean, that assignment is sort of unique in that the idea was how does the environment, what's the signature of the environment, right? But if you're, you don't want to get that creative if it's a children's book and all of a sudden you're, little Bobby is chasing his dog who got away and they run past this like crazily designed park bench that looks
no. Well, that's what I'm saying is you got to think about what's appropriate for the place where you're talking about. So using your example, like which neighborhood does little Bobby live in, and it needs to match, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's it. That's the beginner mistakes in making illustrations.
I think we just gave away all of our secrets, and now everybody's going to be a pro.
I like that though, because it's kind of like you could look at your work. What I would do is look at your work and go through this checklist and see where you're having problems. It might be that you're doing awesome in one or two of these. It might be that 5 of them you see, oh yep, I did it there. I continue, it's consistent. I do it here, and keep that in mind as you move to your next future pieces, and just have that in the back of your head as you're working. Now, if there's certain things that you just can't figure out a way around, like, well, I don't know how to do better brush work. I don't know how to, I love this airbrush tool. I don't know how to fix that, or I don't know how to shift my perspective. Then it's probably time for you to either get some tutorials, get some books, something to elevate your knowledge on what you're doing. So this all, I mean, I didn't intend for this, but now it's turning into an SVS pitch. But if you are wanting to level up, we have so many, like especially in this fundamentals course or fundamentals track that we're doing, we basically teach you how not to do any of these things. Every one of these classes is like an antidote to what you might be doing here, to these type of mistakes. So if you are looking at your stuff, you've sort of given yourself an audit and you're seeing, oh yeah, I got to improve in 1, 2, and 3. Chances are we've got a class that can help you with that, and it's about as affordable as it can be, $30 a month, and you get access to all of it. So look into that, and I'm going to take us out unless you guys have anything to add.
If they're driving down the road or they're on the train or on the bus listening to this, or airplane, I'll include that too. If they want the list, can they get that from the show notes at our website?
Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. 3-Point Perspective is made possible by SVSLearn.com, where becoming a great illustrator starts. And today, your hosts have been, as always, Will Terry, Lee White, and Jake Parker. Do you think we'll ever switch out one of us for someone else one of these days?
People probably want that, but we're not going to give it to them.
Then, honestly, we've got it figured out with our schedules and with our shortcomings. We've got it figured out how to actually do this podcast consistently. I don't want to mix it up and ruin it. Who knows? Maybe it'll make it better, but whatever. So let's tell you how to find our stuff. Will Terry can be found at willterry.com. You can also find his artwork at Will Terry Art on Instagram. Lee White, his website is leewhiteillustration.com. And you can find him on Instagram at leewhiteillo. And I'm Jake Parker. You can find my work at mrjakeparker.com. And you can also find me on Instagram at Jake Parker. Also, we do YouTube videos with all kinds of, basically, if you like this podcast, you're going to like our YouTube videos as well. So just do a search for Lee White on YouTube, do a search for Will Terry, do a search for Jake Parker, and our videos will come up. Okay, podcast is produced by Aaron Pater, and he can be found at painterdraws.com. Podcast is edited by Alex Sugg. That's Sugg with 2 G's. And you can find his work at alexsugg.com. And our podcast video for YouTube is edited by Daniel 2. And that's Daniel 2 with a TU at his website is daniel2.co. And lastly, special thanks to Lisa Fott, who does all of our social media and gets this podcast out to you so you know that we posted it. Thank you for that. If you like this episode, share it around, send someone a link to listen to it. We would love that. That's how podcasts grow. They live and die by word of mouth. And if you care to, leave a review as well. We'd love that. Whatever place does.
Even if it's bad, that'll give us fodder to do another bad review.
Well, it'll help us make better podcast episodes, that's for sure. Also, lastly, we on SVSLearn.com on the forum, there's a free forum that you can join in. There we've got a topic devoted specifically to this episode. So join us over there, and you can add other mistakes that you see amateurs make, or you can defend some of these mistakes. Always a lively discussion there. Our last episode had a great discussion about, what was it? It was a couple episodes ago, the websites and portfolios. And we got a web developer on there that told us a bunch of extra information that he felt like we should have covered in the podcast. So yeah, we want to hear what you think. So chime in over there and let us know your thoughts. All right, that's it, everybody. We'll see you next time.